They ridiculed her, cut her off, and tried to tarnish her name. Now they were the ones scrambling for redemption. Karoline Leavitt had faced tough interviews before. She wasn't new to pushback, especially from a media that made a habit of twisting her words. But this time was different. This wasn't just a heated debate or political banter. This was a calculated attack. The invitation to the prime hour came under the pretense of an open discussion about her latest policy proposals. That's how they framed it. The production team spoke of a fair and honest conversation, assuring her that she'd have the opportunity to present her views. But the moment she stepped into the studio, she knew something was wrong. The audience was already seated, and the energy in the room was heavy. The hosts greeted her with practiced smiles, but their eyes said something else. It only took a glance at the lead moderator for her to realize. This wasn't an interview. It was an ambush. The stage assistant signaled. The lights burned brighter, the cameras rolled, and the first question hit like a punch. Karoline, let's be real here. You're not sitting in that chair because of your qualifications. You're here because you're loyal to the right people. The audience laughed. The game had begun. Karoline had expected pushback, but this was something else. The moment the host delivered the first loaded question, she could feel the trap snapping shut. The air in the studio was thick with anticipation, the kind that comes before a spectacle, not a discussion. She kept her expression steady, refusing to let them see the flicker of recognition that she had walked straight into an ambush. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm and measured. I'm here because I've earned my place. If you want to discuss policy, I'm happy to. But if this is just about personal attacks, I think your viewers deserve better. The host smirked, shaking his head as if amused by her defiance. Oh, come on, Karoline, let's not pretend. Isn't it convenient how every time someone like you gets into a position of power, it's always through the right connections? The audience laughed again, right on cue. She could feel the undercurrent of the room shifting against her. This wasn't about policy. This wasn't about debate. This was about humiliation. Another host chimed in, flipping through a stack of papers theatrically. We did some digging, and it turns out a lot of people are questioning how you got here. In fact, some say your entire career has been about loyalty over merit. Would you care to comment? Karoline's jaw tightened. They weren't even trying to hide it. The digging was a cover for the hit piece they were staging in real time. She adjusted her posture, refusing to let them control the moment. If you want to talk about my qualifications, I'd be happy to list them. But I have a feeling that's not what you're really interested in. The host grinned, sensing the moment to go in for the kill. No, what I'm interested in is whether you can handle real scrutiny or if you're just another political pawn. The audience erupted. Applause, laughter, murmurs of approval, that was it. The real goal. They didn't want answers. They wanted a reaction, and Karoline refused to give them one. She inhaled slowly, controlling her temper. If standing by my values makes me a pawn, then so be it. But at least I'm not a puppet. A murmur rippled through the audience. It wasn't a victory, but it was enough to disrupt the rhythm of the attack. The host hesitated for half a second before recovering with a dismissive chuckle, but she saw it. For a brief moment she had made them nervous. They moved on, shifting topics, but the damage was done. For the next 20 minutes they peppered her with interruptions, reframed her answers, twisted her words. No matter what she said, they spun it back against her. By the time the segment wrapped, the show's producers were already patting themselves on the back. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming next. They thought they had crushed her, that she would walk off set humiliated, diminished, defeated. But they had underestimated Karoline Leavitt. The moment the cameras cut and the show went to commercial, the hosts relaxed, exchanging smug glances. The lead moderator leaned back in his chair, adjusting his mic as if he had just wrapped up another effortless performance. Karoline remained seated, calm, composed. But inside she was calculating. She had felt the audience turn against her, not because she had failed, but because the show had been designed to ensure her failure. Every interruption, every condescending smirk, every well-placed round of laughter, it had all been choreographed. And they thought the moment was over. They had no idea it was just beginning. As she left the studio, her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant, Linda. Linda, don't say anything yet. Let this play out. Karoline didn't need to ask what she meant. Linda knew exactly how this game was played. If they wanted to control the narrative, they had to strike first. And right now, the network held the upper hand. The show's official social media accounts wasted no time. Within minutes, clips of the interview were uploaded, Carefully edited, of course, just enough to frame her as defensive, unprepared, even weak. The captions said it all. Karoline Leavitt crumbles under pressure. Conservative pundit struggles to defend herself in heated debate. When facts meet fiction, watch Karoline get exposed. The comments flooded in, celebrations from her detractors, smug remarks from political commentators, all echoing the same message. They thought they had buried her. Then something unexpected happened. The uncut footage surfaced. Someone, maybe a crew member, maybe a supporter in the audience, uploaded the full interview. No edits, no strategic cuts, just raw, unfiltered truth. And the truth looked very different from what the network had tried to sell. Suddenly, the tide shifted. People who weren't even her supporters began calling it what it was. An ambush. The interruptions, the laughter, the obvious attempts to rattle her. It wasn't a debate. It was a setup. Hashtags started trending. Media bias, let her speak. Expose the prime hour. By the time Karoline checked her phone again, her notifications were out of control. Conservative voices were rallying behind her, but more importantly, so were people who just hated dishonest journalism. And then came the real blow. The sponsors started getting tagged. Viewers weren't just angry, they were strategic. Why is company name supporting a show that silences women? Do you endorse bullying political guests on live TV? I won't be buying from company name anymore. For the first time that night, Karoline allowed herself to smile. The network had spent the evening setting a trap for her. They just didn't realize they had walked straight into one themselves. The network expected a victory lap. They had edited the interview, controlled the headlines and set the narrative in motion. In their minds it was over. Karoline Leavitt had been publicly humiliated. She would fade into the background, another casualty of the prime hour's well-oiled machine. They were wrong. By morning, the full unedited footage had spread like wildfire. What started as a few reposts turned into an avalanche. Conservative commentators dissected the ambush frame by frame. Independent journalists, some not even aligned with Karoline's politics, called it outright media malpractice. Even neutral viewers admitted the show's tactics were indefensible. And the hashtags, they weren't just trending, they were dominating. Media bias, let her speak, Gaz expose, the prime hour. The network tried to push back. Their official statement was a masterclass in corporate deflection. We stand by our commitment to open discussion and rigorous debate. While we regret any misunderstandings, we maintain that our hosts acted professionally and in the spirit of honest discourse. No one bought it. The backlash only grew. By midday, something even bigger happened. The sponsors caved. The first domino fell when a major advertiser, a household name in tech, announced they were pulling their ads from the show. Their statement was carefully worded, avoiding controversy while making it clear they wouldn't support content that undermined fair discussion. Within hours, another company followed. Then, another. The network went into full damage control. Anonymous sources leaked reports of panic behind the scenes, executives scrambling for answers, PR teams working overtime, producers questioning if they had pushed too far. Then, the show's hosts went silent. No tweets, no damage control interviews. Nothing. They were waiting for instructions. But Karoline, she wasn't waiting for anything. That night, she posted just one message. The truth always comes out. No hashtags, no follow-ups. She didn't need to say anything else. The internet was already doing the work for her. And behind the scenes, she was about to take it even further. She wasn't just going to win the internet battle. She was going to take the entire network down. The network was bleeding. Sponsors were fleeing. The show's reputation was in freefall and the internet wasn't letting up. Every attempt to control the narrative failed. Every statement they released was met with mockery and more backlash. And Karoline? She hadn't even started fighting yet. She sat in her office, phone buzzing non-stop. Calls from allies, offers for interviews, messages from legal experts who smelled blood in the water. Then came the call she was waiting for. We have something. Her attorney, Mark Weston, had been quietly digging into the network's internal operations since the interview aired. He wasn't just looking for mistakes. He was looking for evidence. And now, he had it. It's worse than we thought, Mark said. This wasn't just a rough interview, it was premeditated. He sent over the first batch of leaked emails. Karoline opened the files, scrolling through the exchanges between the Prime Hour's producers. Make sure she stumbles. Cut her off if she gets too comfortable. The goal is to shake her confidence. Don't let her control the conversation. Karoline felt a slow, simmering anger settle in. This wasn't just bias. It wasn't just an unfair interview. It was a coordinated attack, and now they had the receipts. "We're not just talking about media malpractice," Mark continued. "This is targeted defamation, professional sabotage, maybe even coercion from higher-ups." Karoline exhaled, steadying herself. "What are our options?" Mark didn't hesitate. "We go public, we go legal, and we bury them." Karoline had been in politics long enough to know that lawsuits weren't just about justice, they were about leverage. She could just let the backlash run its course. The network was already suffering, but if she took this to court, if she exposed them in a legal setting, this wouldn't just be a PR disaster. It would be an institutional collapse. She made her decision. "Draft the lawsuit," she said, "and prepare a statement. I want this everywhere by morning." Mark's voice was steady. "Consider it done." That night, headlines across the country changed. Karoline Leavitt to sue network for targeted defamation and media malpractice. Bombshell leaks reveal the Prime Hour planned interview as a hit piece. Insiders say more whistleblowers may come forward. By the time Karoline woke up the next morning, the network was in full-blown crisis mode. They had tried to destroy her. Now they were the ones on trial. The lawsuit was like a bomb detonating inside the network. By noon, the corporate offices of the Prime Hour's parent company were in full-scale crisis mode. Conference rooms filled with frantic executives, PR teams scrambling to craft a response, lawyers reviewing the leaked emails line by line, searching for any escape. But there wasn't one. The evidence was damning. More leaked documents surfaced. Production notes, rehearsal scripts, even internal memos detailing how certain guests should be handled. It wasn't just Karoline. This was a pattern. A former employee, anonymous at first, came forward with a statement. Producers were instructed to cut off conservative guests, steer the conversation into hostile territory, and manipulate the edit to frame them as incompetent or extreme. This wasn't journalism. It was an operation. The media exploded. This wasn't just about Karoline anymore. It was about media credibility. Even networks that usually defended the Prime Hour hesitated. No one wanted to be associated with a sinking ship. Political commentators, journalists, and former guests started to weigh in. Some said they had suspected manipulation for years. Others admitted they had been victims of it themselves. And then, the real breaking point, another former producer came forward. This time, publicly. His name was Daniel Grant. He had worked on the Prime Hour for 5 years before quitting, and now he was ready to talk. Sitting across from a news anchor in a live interview, he looked into the camera and dropped the hammer. "I was part of it. I saw how they treated certain guests. We were given direct instructions, not to interview them but to destroy them. The network had no response. They were drowning. More advertisers pulled out. Social media erupted with demands for accountability. Stockholders of the parent company demanded action. Inside the Prime Hour's offices, panic turned into resignations. 2 segment producers were fired. A senior executive stepped down. The show's main host went silent. And Karoline, she waited. She knew the network's next move would be desperation, a counter-lawsuit, a smear campaign, something to shift the focus away from their guilt. But she was ready, because this wasn't just a fight for her reputation anymore. This was about taking them down for good. The network was cornered. Every attempt to control the damage had failed. The leaked emails, the whistleblowers, the ex-producer's confession, there was no spinning it anymore. The sponsors were gone. The ratings had plummeted, and even their own allies in the media were hesitant to defend them, but they weren't going down without a fight. 2 days after Karoline's lawsuit went public, the network announced their counterattack. Frivolous lawsuit filed by right-wing provocateur Karoline Leavitt aims to stifle free press. The press release accused her of playing the victim, of trying to intimidate journalists, of weaponizing public outrage for personal gain. It was a predictable move, and it backfired spectacularly. Karoline's legal team responded immediately. They filed a subpoena for all internal communications related to her interview, demanding access to production logs, editorial meetings, and emails from the show's executives. The network tried to resist. They stalled. They objected. They called it a fishing expedition. The judge disagreed. Karoline won the motion, and when the first batch of internal records arrived, they found exactly what they needed. More emails, more documents, more evidence that this wasn't just a one-time setup. This was standard practice. One email in particular stood out. "We need to make sure these guests never leave looking credible. That's the priority." The legal team immediately leaked it to the press. The headlines hit like an earthquake. "Shocking email reveals the Prime Hour's secret strategy to discredit conservative voices." This isn't journalism, it's propaganda. What else is the media hiding? The network's entire credibility was under fire, and then just when things couldn't get worse for them, they did. A second former producer came forward, this time with recordings. Audio clips of behind-the-scenes meetings, where top executives openly discussed ways to manipulate interviews, cut footage strategically, and push guests into damaging sound bites. And one recording in particular was devastating. A senior producer's voice clear as day. "Karoline, oh, we're gonna wreck her. We already have the edit mapped out." Silence. The network had no response, because there was no defense left. The only question now was, how much more would be exposed before this was over? The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled every seat. Cameras lined the hallways, and outside protesters and supporters clashed, each side screaming for their version of justice. This wasn't just a defamation case anymore. This was a reckoning. Karoline sat beside her legal team, calm but focused. Across the room, the network's attorneys whispered among themselves, their confidence visibly shaken. They had spent weeks trying to bury this. They had failed. The judge called for order, and the opening arguments began. Karoline's lead attorney, Mark Weston, wasted no time. "This case isn't about political differences. It's about media accountability. My client was targeted, discredited, and professionally harmed, not through honest journalism, but through calculated deception." Then he laid out the evidence, the leaked emails, the production notes, the recordings where producers openly discussed sabotaging guests. He played one of them for the jury. The room went dead silent as the voice of a senior producer echoed through the courtroom speakers. "Karoline, oh, we're gonna wreck her. We already have the edit mapped out." The network's legal team shifted uncomfortably. There was no spinning this. When it was their turn, the network's lawyers tried to fight back. They claimed the emails were taken out of context. They argued that the show was meant to be entertainment, not hard news. They insisted that Karoline knew what she was signing up for. But then came the final blow. The former producer who had leaked the audio took the stand. Under oath, he confirmed what everyone already suspected. "We were given explicit instructions to set her up. The goal wasn't discussion, it was humiliation." Then he dropped another bombshell. This wasn't just about Karoline. "We did this to multiple guests, and it came from the top." The entire network was now on trial, and they knew it. That night, executives held an emergency meeting. Some wanted to settle, others wanted to fight. But one thing was clear. They weren't walking away from this unscathed. The only question was, would they survive it at all? The courtroom was tense. Journalists scribbled notes. Cameras flashed, and every eye in the room was fixed on the jury box. The entire country was waiting for this moment. Karoline sat still, her hands folded in her lap. Across from her, the network's legal team looked drained, their once confident expressions now replaced by the grim realization that they had lost control of the narrative. The judge entered. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood. "We have, Your Honor." A beat of silence. Then, "In the matter of defamation and professional harm, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Karoline Leavitt." Gasps, murmurs, a few stunned expressions. The network's attorneys visibly deflated. The executives in the back row exchanged frantic whispers. But there was no escaping it now. The judge turned to Karoline's side. "The court awards damages in the amount of $50 million. The moment the words left his mouth, the courtroom erupted. Some journalists rushed to file breaking news reports. Others ran outside where crowds of supporters cheered. But inside, Karoline simply closed her eyes for a brief moment, exhaling as the weight of the past few months finally lifted. The consequences for the network were swift and brutal. A formal apology was issued, not just to Karoline, but to every guest who had been subjected to their tactics. Major advertisers announced they were severing ties permanently. The show was officially cancelled. The network framed it as a restructuring decision, but everyone knew the truth. By the end of the week, executives started resigning. Lawsuits from other victims piled up. Employees came forward with even more damning allegations. This wasn't just a loss for the network. This was a collapse. And Karoline, her career didn't just survive, it thrived. Book deals, speaking engagements, a stronger platform than ever. But she didn't use it to gloat. Instead, she left the public with this. It's not about silencing people you disagree with. It's about accountability. The media isn't supposed to manufacture reality. It's supposed to report it. And that was a message no one could ignore. The fallout was unstoppable. Within a month, the Prime Hour was permanently off the air. Within 2 months, the network's stock had plummeted. Within 6 months, a new wave of lawsuits forced a corporate overhaul. Executives resigned, producers were fired, and the media industry was changed forever. Karoline had done what no one thought possible. She had exposed the machine. Her victory wasn't just about a courtroom battle. It was about the truth finally coming to light. Journalists started questioning industry norms. Political debates were now held to a higher standard. Other networks scrambled to distance themselves from similar tactics. Karoline's platform grew stronger than ever. She wasn't just a political figure anymore, she was a symbol, and as she stepped onto the stage of her first sold-out speaking event, she looked at the audience, thousands of faces waiting for her words. The truth always wins, she said, no matter how hard they try to bury it. A standing ovation. She smiled. They had tried to silence her, but now she was louder than ever. What do you think about Karoline's fight for justice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge the narrative. Share this if you believe in holding the media accountable, because the truth, it always comes out.